think we'll give it one more minute. Looks like our participant number is still going up a little bit, so we'll get started in just a minute. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started just because we want to be mindful of everybody's time. Thank you all so much for coming to our November T2 meeting. I hope when you were coming in, you all had a chance to look at the thoughtful responses from our students about what being a first-generation student means to them. We certainly saw some different themes around responsibility, pride, being the one to set a new precedent in their family, being an inspiration. And we really appreciate the students' honesty and reflections and putting words to how they're feeling. And we hope we can continue these conversations throughout the rest of the year. It's really nice to see we still have people joining us, another good turnout for these Zoom meetings. As you all should very well know by now, the plan for tonight is to talk about financial aid. And in a few moments, I'm going to introduce you all to the amazing Lori Seuch, our financial aid expert. But before we get officially started with her, I do have a few announcements to make. The first one is just a reminder, mostly for the students, that Term 1 report cards were posted to Aspen yesterday. If you haven't already looked at your report card, I'm sure many of you jumped right on and looked, but if you haven't yet, please do that. It is critical that you look for accuracy, and if there's any errors, you need to let your school counselor and Ms. Stamper, the registrar, know immediately. The reason why this is time sensitive is that if you've already applied to some colleges, these grades are going to be sent out this week. And certainly if there's any mistakes with that report card, we wouldn't want that to be sent. So if you need any help with that, certainly reach out to any of the three of us as well. We can help you with that process. The second reminder that we have is just one that was actually already in the emails that you received from Ms. Hannenberger and Ms. Garrity. There's a really interesting webinar that's happening this Thursday, November 19th at 8 p.m. It's a panel discussion and Q&A for students who will be the first generation college students. And admissions counselors who are first gens themselves and current students from Caltech, UMass Lowell, University of Washington, and Wesleyan will all be there talking about their experiences, offering advice, and there'll be time at the end for questions and answers. So it looks really good. We would encourage you to go, and it's free. So again, that's this Thursday at 8 p.m. My next reminder is just a transcript deadline. So for those of you who will be applying to your first round of colleges for January 1st, please make sure that you have written down somewhere the date of Friday, December 4th. The reason for that is when your transcript request is due. It is important that it is in by that Friday, December 4th, for any January 1st deadlines if it's your first time applying. And again, that transcript request is done through My School Bucks. If you need assistance with that, we are happy to walk you through it. And then my last reminder is just a programming note for T2. So what we're planning for right now is for the month of December, we're actually not going to meet in a big group setting like this. What we're planning to do instead is to offer you all the opportunity to have an individual appointment with one of the three of us, so Ms. Hannenberger, Ms. Garrity, or myself. And then we also would like to offer you the opportunity to have an individual meeting with Lori Seuch for financial aid questions, any unique circumstances that you have. And also another one of our fabulous T2 mentors, Eileen Morrison, if you have any questions regarding immigration. So, you know, certainly we'll send a lot of information, but the date is going to be Wednesday, December 9th from 6 to 8 p.m. And we'll have you sign up if you are interested for an appointment, and then we'll send you a specific time slot and a Zoom link that will be assigned to you. So more information will come. Just want you to make sure that you have Wednesday, December 9th on your calendar. Does anybody have any questions? I know that was a lot. Questions about any of the reminders? All right, doesn't seem like it. All right, so let's jump into our financial aid discussion. Our wonderful presenter, Lori Seuch, is here. Lori works for MEFA. She's a Newton resident and has gone through the college process with her own children. She also is a new proud puppy mommy that we just learned. And Lori, we're so lucky she's been presenting at these big group meetings for us for the past 5 years. As a staff, she provides us with constant support, and she meets with individual students to help with unique needs and challenges. So we really, really appreciate her, and we're so thankful for her partnership. So I'm going to turn it over to Lori, and during the presentation, if you have questions, we'd like for you to use the chat feature, and we can answer questions as we go, and we'll save some questions for the end to ask Lori. So don't hesitate. This is a time to ask questions. There are no silly questions. So please don't hold back. I'm sure Lori has heard every possible question there is. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Lori.
Thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and pull up a deck and get to the beginning. There you go. So it's so nice to be invited back. Thank you so much. And as Ms. Hall said, there are no silly questions, and really I am here to help you because this is tricky and complicated and confusing, and I'm here to help de-stress the process a little bit. So use me, ask me, email me, and we'll get through this, and it'll all be good. So I'm going to talk super fast, and if there are things that I'm saying that are confusing to you, then put something in chat, and one of your fabulous folks from Newton North will pause me. And I have a whole lot of slides in this, but I'm not going to go through all of them, but I wanted you to have them so that you could refer to them after the fact. My biggest goal tonight is to make sure I answer your questions. So that's what I'm going to focus on. So we're going to talk about college financing. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the different kinds of places that you can find financial aid. And as you can see from this slide, you can get federal financial aid, Massachusetts, college and university, and other agencies. And one of the questions that you submitted earlier was, what are the best places to find scholarships and grants? And so it's a pretty broad question. So I just wanted to make sure that I covered a little bit about each of these. So with the federal government, they have college, they have grants, but they're pretty minimal. And we'll talk about that as we get into the FAFSA and NeedBased Aid and things like that. Massachusetts, where you can see the URL mass.edu/OSFA, also has a whole host of scholarships and grants this year, or they have had, but they've added one for part-time students going to community college, which is new this year. So that's something that I really felt that you all should know. Colleges and universities that you apply to are going to probably be your biggest source of scholarships and grants. They have usually a pocket of money that they put aside for both merit-based financial aid and need-based financial aid. And we'll talk a little bit about both of those. But that's really where you're going to get sort of the bulk of what you're going to need. And other agencies like MEFApathway.org or fastweb.com or goingmerry.com has individual local scholarships that you can go and write an essay for, or you might fall into a demographic category that somebody who has $500 or $1,000 or $2,000 wants to give to a deserving student. So there's all sorts of information on MEFA.org for these private scholarship searches. And actually there's a whole page dedicated to that. So throughout, I will be encouraging you to check out our website because it doesn't cost you any money to go do that, and it could get you some money. The one thing I will say about these scholarships from other agencies, you shouldn't be paying anybody to help you find money through these. The folks that are saying to you, we can get you $2,000 if you give us 200, you can get those just by going to these websites too. You shouldn't need to pay anybody for them. They're scams. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, super quick. Merit-based aid is aid that is usually grant and scholarship. Grant and scholarship means it's money that you don't have to pay back or work for. And as you can see from the slide, it's awarded based on recognition of a student's achievement. So it might be because you're a fabulous oboe player and the school is looking for an oboe player. It could be sports related. It could be that you are really super in Greek mythology and they're looking for that. So it's a way for schools, colleges, and universities to diversify who they're admitting by specific talents. Something that I just want to mention about merit scholarships is that they are, you can find them usually on the admissions website of the colleges that you're looking at, not necessarily the financial aid website. And they may have separate applications that you need to complete. And some may just be by the simple fact that you're submitting an application. When the admissions officer is looking at your application, they'll say, oh, this person would be a good candidate for the presidential scholarship or whatever it is, because it can be also based on academics. So that's a little bit about merit-based aid. Need-based aid is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking tonight. And basically, need-based aid is financial aid that's awarded to families based on financial need. And the eligibility, that financial need, is determined by a standardized formula, and it comes out of you completing the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. Most financial aid is need-based aid. So it could be grants and scholarship, which again is money that you don't have to pay back or work for. It could be loans. So the federal direct student loan is considered financial aid, but that's money that you would borrow and then the student would pay it back. Or there's federal work study, which is money that you would get for working at a job. And that job could be 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week. It might be on campus at the bookstore, or it might be working in the financial aid office. Always a good place to get a work study job is the financial aid office. I'll just say that. And you work for it. And at the end of the week, you submit your hours. And then the following week, you get a paycheck. And so that is considered financial aid because it's subsidized by the federal government. And you can use that to save up for books or pizza or things like that. So it's not necessarily put towards your current semester's tuition bill. But those are the kinds of need-based aid. What are the best ways to find need-based financial aid was one of the questions that you submitted earlier. And the best way to find need-based financial aid is to complete the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. And if the college is requiring it, the CSS Profile. And we're going to talk about both of those a little bit more. Need-based financial aid is, I would say, probably 80% of the money that schools give out. So and they give it out based on the FAFSA and the profile. So there's there's how you would get need-based financial aid. So let's talk about those applications. Don't submit applications late. So part of your homework should be, as I'm sure your team here has been telling you, is that you need to go to each of the schools' websites that you're thinking about applying to and make a timeline. And you need to check two things. You need to check the admissions timeline. When do you have to have your admissions application submitted? And when do you have to apply for financial aid? It doesn't happen after you've been admitted. It usually happens at the same time or just a little, like a week later. It's really important that you submit your financial aid applications on time, because if you submit after the priority deadline that the school has, you could be missing out on tens of thousands of dollars. So I'm going to say that one more time. Two different deadlines you're looking for. One's the admissions application, one's the financial aid application. And I know that the team here has a great worksheet that they give to students so that you can keep track of that. So I'm hoping that that's still something that you do. And if not, then MEFA again has one on our website and the URL is here. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of the FAFSA. So as I've said, the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. Free. You don't have to pay any money to complete the FAFSA. If somebody's charging you to complete the FAFSA, then you're on the wrong website. So the only place you need to go for the FAFSA is FAFSA.gov. And that's been available since October 1st. Please don't pay any money to complete the FAFSA. It's free. You're going to need an FSA ID. And again, the URL is on the slide in front of you. And that's basically your way of being able to go in and complete the FAFSA, but it's also whoever your parent is or guardian that is helping you complete the FAFSA, they need to have one too. And I'm going to say this because I've experienced it with you with this group during the December meetings. Right when you create your FSA ID, and you should do that now, you want to write that down somewhere and remember it, because to retrieve it after the fact, I don't know why it's so complicated, but it always trips people up. And I can't say it enough. It shouldn't be that complicated, but it is. So write down the FSA ID. The student needs one, and whoever the adult is that's also completing the FAFSA needs an FSA ID. Okay. One of the questions we got was, how is the FAFSA used by school? So the information that you're going to be putting down on the FAFSA are things like income and assets, and you're breaking it down by the student and then by the parents. And we'll talk about non-custodial parents and things like that. But basically what it means is that the student will be putting down how much money you earned 2 years ago. So in 2019 for this coming year's application process. And you'll be putting down what's in your savings account, and you'll be putting down if you have any other assets, like do you have stocks or bonds or things like that. You would put that down. And there's pretty good instructions, I have to say, on the FAFSA, so that if you get stuck on like, well, what do I do with child support? How do I put that down? It will sort of guide you right through where you put each of those different things. And then the parent goes and puts that same information in their section. Because the parent and the student have separate FSA IDs, unless you're completing the FAFSA together, you won't see what your student puts down or what your parent puts down. So if that's a sensitive topic for families, then you can do it separately, and you'll only see your information and the student will only see their information. Most families do try and do it together because you make a night out of it. You say, all right, we're going to get all of our materials together, and we're going to sit down together for an hour, and we're going to muddle through the FAFSA. But I just wanted to explain that. So then once you fill out that information, a calculation is performed, and it determines what we just called financial need. And that's what the schools use to determine how much need-based eligibility you might have. And then within that, they then say, okay, you might show that you have need for, and I'm just going to throw out a random number, $25,000. We're going to give you financial aid to cover $20,000 of that $25,000. So even though your need might be $25,000, some schools are only going to fill a portion of that financial need. So it depends on the schools, and I'm probably getting too much into the weeds right now, so I'm going to keep it going along. If you don't think you'll qualify for need-based financial aid, should you still fill out the FAFSA? So this is a question that we get all the time. And my answer is, for the first year, it's worth filling out the FAFSA. Why? It's because some schools might look at the information on the admissions application and look at the FAFSA and say, well, you don't maybe qualify for need-based aid, but based on what you're giving us on the FAFSA, you might qualify for some merit-based aid. Like it might put you over the edge for a merit-based scholarship, even though that's not need-based. Filling out the FAFSA also opens up the door for a family to be considered for any state aid that they might be eligible for, including the Adams Grant, which goes to top performers from the MCAS with some other restrictions. So they would require you to fill out the FAFSA. The other reason to fill out the FAFSA is if you think you might not qualify for need-based financial aid, but you think you might need to borrow, the parent, some loans to help cover the cost of wherever it is that the student's going to school. And one of the loan options is a federal loan called the Federal Plus Loan. They require that you complete the FAFSA. And finally, even if you're not going to qualify for need-based financial aid, the student will always be eligible for a direct loan, a federal direct loan, which is a student-based loan. There's a slide at the very end if you want details on that, where you have to fill out the FAFSA for the federal direct student loan. So if you want your student to have a little bit of the responsibility, even if you wouldn't qualify, then complete the FAFSA. Okay, we talked a little bit about what's reported on the FAFSA. So you can read that from the information on the deck that you're going to be getting, including the financial information. And now we're going to talk about the CSS profile. So the FAFSA is required by every school that you're applying to for financial aid. So it's one form, and we'll talk about how to apply with it, but every school requires that. The CSS profile is only required by some colleges and universities, and it's for them to award their own money. So no federal money comes from the completion of the CSS profile. The CSS profile does cost money to apply for. So as you can see from the slide, it's $25 for the first school and $16 for each additional school. And it goes into significantly more depth than the FAFSA. So the profile, this is what I'm going to say to you honestly, is that when you're going to sit down to do the profile, it's good if you have your FAFSA information sort of handy because you've got the basics there, and take a deep breath and just do it question by question. It's just a complicated, not very user-friendly form, but you have to complete it if you want to see if you're eligible for money from many private institutions. Now, one of the things that this slide says is non-custodial parent will need to submit a separate profile. So I'm going to talk about two things. You asked two questions about that. What if the non-custodial parent doesn't live in the United States? So if the non-custodial parent doesn't live in the United States, okay, let me back up. So when you complete the CSS profile, the custodial parent should be the one completing it with the student on the first go round. Depending on the schools that you're submitting the profile to, and you can find out what schools require the profile by, again, going to those financial aid websites for each school and seeing what the application materials required are. Some schools might not even ask you for a non-custodial parent to complete the CSS profile, and some schools will, but they're not going to get to that step until you've submitted the first one, so the student and the custodial parent. If the school requires a non-custodial parent to fill out the profile, even if they don't live in the United States, you would supply that parent's contact information wherever they might be in the world, and CSS Profile would be emailed to them to complete. And they would have to translate any income earned into dollars and go from there. But they're still required to complete it. So then that leads us to the next question. What do you do if your non-custodial parent refuses to supply any financial aid information? And this is regardless of whether they live in the United States or in the world. So it's a case-by-case conversation with the schools on what the circumstances are about why the non-custodial parent is refusing to donate. So there is a thing called the non-custodial waiver, and it's up to the college to determine whether they want to let you not submit a non-custodial parent's information depending on the circumstances. So a good example is if there has been no contact with the non-custodial parent since the student was born, or there's been trauma or things like that, then most likely the college will allow for a waiver to be placed so that you don't have to have the non-custodial parent submit the form. I was talking to a parent a few weeks ago where the non-custodial parent was just, they were around, but they just basically said, I'm not going to. And that's going to be a tougher sell with some schools who are going to say it's not our responsibility to make up the money for the non-custodial parent. But it's a case-by-case situation. So you really need to, that's when you would call the financial aid office and say, here, or write to them, here's my circumstances, here's my situation. I'm really going to have trouble getting the non-custodial parent to do this. Can I have that portion waived? And hear what they have to say. And here's where I'll say to you, whatever schools you're looking at, students, and I can't see any of you right now, but whatever schools you're looking at, make sure you're okay with each of them, because you don't want to get your heart set on one and then have them say, well, we need that non-custodial information, and without it, we're not going to give you any aid, because it's they can do that. And so I just want you to be sort of open to, I'm applying to these 3 schools, these 5 schools, these 10 schools, and be okay with wherever you land, because there's going to be lots of things that play into where you end up.
Lori, can I jump in? We do have a question. Can Lori please clarify that non-custodial parent information is not required for completing the FAFSA? Could you just talk a little bit about that FAFSA versus CSS and the custodial versus non-custodial?
Thank you so much. Yep. So the FAFSA only requires the student and the custodial parent or parents. So it doesn't care about a non-custodial parent's information. It doesn't care about your primary home if you own your home. It's only looking for a small set of information, and they define the custodial parent as whomever the student lives with more than 50% of their time throughout the year. And if you're living with each parent exactly the same amount, then who's providing more financial support to the student? But the FAFSA does not need to know anything about the non-custodial parent. And I hope that answers the question. Maybe someone could give Ms. Hall a thumbs up on that. Okay.
I'll give you the thumbs up, Lori.
Thank you. All right.
I'm sorry, Lori, there was one more question that came in. I just want to be mindful to answer it in time too.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll touch on this later, but what happens if a family has a very different 2019 versus 2020 tax return? And I'm sure there may be others in this boat given the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to get to that in just a moment.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I'm not going to read through this slide. It tells you basically what happens after you apply and what happens with the school, and you can have that information. And then what the financial aid office is. And so here's where we're going to address that category, and this also what financial aid categories are undocumented students eligible for. So the financial aid office, let's just talk about the financial aid office for a moment. They are there to help you answer questions, to review your applications, and to get a class admitted to their school. Okay, so you should feel free to call any of the financial aid offices of the schools that you're looking to apply to, and you don't need to say anything. You don't need to tell them that you're applying to other schools. You don't need to tell them your name. You can just say, I am a potential student and I want to understand your policy on non-custodial waivers. I'm filling out the FAFSA and I don't know how to answer this question. Can you help me? And they're there to help you, and they look forward to helping you. So you should use the financial aid offices of the schools that you're applying to. If you have a change in circumstance, on the FAFSA, you have to put down the 2019 information. And then if your current information is just completely different because of the pandemic or for whatever reason, you need to send the financial aid offices a letter detailing your current information. So to the extent that you can give documentation about what your income is now, whether it's a W-2 or a pay stub or something like that, that will help them understand what your circumstances are. And it can be a generic letter. So, dear financial aid office, and then you send that to each of the schools that you're applying to. So you don't necessarily need to do dear BU, dear BC, dear UMass. It could be the same letter. And that's where they'll get into looking at whether they can use the current information from your application or from a letter on their review of the application. Same goes for if you get a financial aid award and you need to appeal that after the fact. And we can talk about that more in December or in April, actually, when we chat, when you're making your decisions. So you should be using the financial aid office to send out any specific considerations. Now, on the CSS profile, they do give you a block where you can put in unusual circumstances. So you can indicate on the profile if your circumstances have changed and your income's very different now than it was in 2019. But I would still follow up with a letter to the financial aid offices. And then one of the questions that we got was, what financial aid categories are undocumented students eligible for? So again, and I put it in this slide specifically, it depends. And you should be checking, if you are an undocumented student, you should be checking in with each of the schools that you're thinking about applying for to see what they have available. Some schools have grant and scholarship money available for undocumented students because they made that a priority, and they will use their own application to determine what you might be eligible for. Some schools will say you might be eligible for some money similar to Mass State benefits, and some schools will say we don't have any monies set aside. Some schools will review the undocumented student's application the same as they would an international student. So especially where international students can't get to the US right now to go to school, there might actually be a good pot of money in that category. So that just made me so happy, Ms. Hall. So you should just be in touch with the financial aid office to see, do you have monies for undocumented students? I put down at the bottom of this slide a link. We have all sorts of blogs and information on MEFA.org for specifically this question. So if you were to cut and paste that link that I put down there into your web browser, it would bring you right to MEFA.org to the article, and it has specific links at the bottom of that for agencies where you can also explore to determine if there's monies available for you in your circumstances. Okay. How financial decisions are made.
Sorry,
So,
Lori, can I just
yeah.
jump in with the next question that we
Absolutely.
had?
Yeah.
FAFSA has spaces for 10 schools only. What should we do if we're applying to more than 10 schools?
Cool. So you should apply to your top 10 schools at the beginning, and you should apply for the schools that have the earliest deadlines. So the top 10 should be the first 10 schools that you put on the FAFSA should be the ones with the earliest deadlines and your top choices. Once you get confirmation that the FAFSA has been received by those 10 schools, then you can go in at FAFSA.gov using your FSA ID that you've written down somewhere and delete schools and add the rest of the schools that you want. Any changes that you make after the fact will go to all of the schools that you've submitted the FAFSA to. I didn't complete that sentence. So I hope that makes sense. So start with your first 10 schools after you've received confirmation, that the FAFSA has been submitted successfully. At that point, you can go back into FAFSA.gov, make changes using your FSA ID, delete some schools, and add the schools that you didn't get in the first go round. Once you hit submit, then those schools will get the FAFSA information as well. And again, you should get confirmation about that.
Thank you.
Great. Good. Okay, so I have in here some slides on how financial aid decisions are made, talks about cost of attendance and expected family contribution, and it talks about the formula. So basically, the cost of attendance is not just tuition and fees and room and board, but it's tuition and fees and room and board and books and supplies and travel expenses and incidentals and things like that. So it's bigger than just what you're going to get billed for. The expected family contribution comes from your completion of the FAFSA. Oftentimes, I'll hear they said that my EFC, my expected family contribution, is so much more than I could ever be expected to pay. What's the deal with that? And the standardized formula takes into account all sorts of different allowances to come up with what they think a family can absorb from past contributions, current income, and future income, so borrowing. So that's where the EFC comes from. And so whatever the cost of attendance is, minus that expected family contribution, that's where your eligibility falls into, and that's what the school will attempt to award up to. A way of seeing sort of where you might fall into this category is by going onto a school's website and finding their net price calculator. And it's basically sort of a gauge on the FAFSA and the profile for each school, and it's pretty specific. So it can give you an idea of what you may or may not qualify for at individual schools. So that might help you if you want to take the time to go and look at the net price calculators. And then I have a whole section on paying for college, which we don't really need to get into tonight, but I wanted you to have it. I especially liked this slide because these are conversations that you all should be having about where am I going to go to school? And it goes back to the slide when I talked about be comfortable with whatever schools you're applying to, because you never know where you're going to end up going. But there's really good information in these slides, which is why I wanted to keep them for you. There's really good options in Massachusetts if you want to go to a 2-year school and then transfer to a 4-year school. So the information is here on that. I think it's like an unsung hero for our students that Massachusetts is doing this for you guys and people don't know about it. So we're trying to get the word out there. And I put a slide in about the federal direct student loan just in case you wanted it. And there's some free resources. There's a FAFSA day. You can get FAFSA specific help if you're having problems with that. And that happens all the time. You can go to Mass EdCo, and the best part is you can come to me. So what do you want to do now? You want to get that FSA ID, you want to write it down. Make sure you get the deadlines for admissions applications and financial aid applications. And while I don't want to sell MEFA, we are a not-for-profit state authority, so it's our mission to help you figure this stuff out. If you sign up for our emails, we're going to email you like 2 paragraphs every couple of weeks, and they're usually helpful and related to what you're going through right now as far as timeline. So it's worth it, in my opinion, but you know, that's that. And we'd love it if you connected with us on social media. And that's it for my formal presentation, but I would love to spend as much time as you want me to answering specific questions.
Lori, can we go back and revisit the question about if your income changes between 2019 and now, or after you submit the FAFSA, something happens?
Yep.
Could you just talk about that a little bit in detail? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So when you're completing the FAFSA and the CSS profile, they're going to refer to specific line items, excuse me, on the 1040s that you've submitted for the year 2019. So you just need to put that information in, even though your income might be drastically different now. So you go ahead and submit that. And then the real work comes with you being in touch with the financial aid offices at the schools that you're applying to with documentation about what your current income is. So a letter would be, or an email would be, I listed on my FAFSA, my 2019 income was $50,000, but I've lost my job now. And for all of 2020, I've made $5,000. Here's the last pay stub that I have that shows that. What else do you need from me in order to evaluate my circumstances based on my 2020 income instead of my 2019 income? So that's for the FAFSA. And you should do that for every school that you're applying to. The profile has a block on it where the CSS profile, excuse me, has a block on it where you can say that same thing, and it doesn't hurt to put it there, it's helpful, but you should still send that letter or that email communication with the financial aid offices at each of the schools you're applying to show them what your circumstances are now so that they can take an active review of where you are right now, because the whole world has changed. And they get that. They get that a lot. And if that didn't answer the specific person's question, if you could put them in touch with me and we can just talk one-on-one, I'm happy to do that.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions from people? Either put them in the chat or if you want to even just unmute yourself and ask. The group is small enough we could do that.
I'd be curious if, I wish we could do a show of hands, how many people have actually started the FAFSA, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Go Charlotte, that's great.
Well, yeah, that's good. True, you can reply in the chat. Oh, we got a thumbs up.
Oh, I didn't even think about.
We got another one. Woohoo!
Oh. That's awesome. And I know that I was speaking very quickly. So I should also say that on MEFA.org, we have these webinars, so not me, but actual presenters that do this for real, recorded, probably at a much more sane pace than what I just did. So I apologize for speaking so quickly.
And you also have them in other languages. I know you
We
had a
do.
Spanish one.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Hamburger. Yep, we absolutely do. That's a great question. So thanks, Eileen. So feeding me questions. I like that. So the question is, can you talk about how outside scholarships may affect a financial aid award from a school? So we talked about how financial aid awards are made, that cost of attendance minus expected family contribution equals your financial aid eligibility. And then I gave you the example that you might have financial aid eligibility of $25,000, but the school only awards you $20,000. So there's a $5,000 gap in there. If you were to get outside scholarships, then those would fill in that $5,000 gap. And that's beautiful. Now, say you had $25,000 of eligibility and the school actually awarded you $25,000 in financial aid. If you got outside scholarships on top of that $25,000 of aid that the school awarded you, they would have to take away something in order to let you keep the outside scholarships that you got. Most schools will first reduce your loan or your work study. So in other words, not the free stuff, not the free money. So it's still worth it to apply for those outside scholarships in hopes that you don't have to work as many hours in school, or that you don't have to big time borrow as much when you go to school. Because the scholarships and grants, again, that's money that you just get, you don't have to pay it back. If you already applied via the Common App but didn't indicate that you were applying for financial aid, can you still submit if you are within the deadline? Absolutely.
And you should.
And you should. Yep. Common App is great for the admissions application, and it gives the admissions office a view as to how many people might be applying for financial aid, but the real test is who actually puts in the applications. So without a doubt, you should be applying for financial aid. Everybody, in my opinion, everybody should be completing the FAFSA at least the first year.
I think someone has their hand up.
Oh, can they unmute and ask?
It's a mentor with the name iPad. Do you want to ask your question?
Should we unmute you, iPad?
Oh, yeah. There you
Hi,
go.
I was just saying that we had completed, that's why I raised my hand.
Oh,
Like
good.
we had completed the FAFSA.
Oh,
Great.
excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. So that's why my hand was raised. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so as Ms. Hall indicated, I am going to be available on December 9th for follow-up, and that's before most of the deadlines. And as you start to muddle through these applications, or you're getting confused, or you have questions, they can easily put you in touch with me. I'm very quick to respond, and I love helping people figure this out. So, and I love Newton North because my boys went there. And so just use me.
Thank you, Lori. That was awesome. I learn new things every year, like truly. So thank you for taking the time to be with us, and we certainly will be using you a lot, I'm sure, over the next few months. And please, mentors and mentees, do not hesitate to take Lori up on that offer. So we will go ahead and let everybody take off. We'll wait for a couple minutes in here if anybody has last minute questions, but we'll be in touch over email, and students, we'll see you on Friday in community. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
For coming, everyone. Great to
you.
see you.
Thank you so much. Good job.